He is a lifelong resident of Queens, is Jimmy Van Bramer, has served on the New York City Council since 2010, representing the people of Queens' 26th Council District. He is now serving as Deputy Leader of the City Council, Chair of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, and is a member of the Speaker's Budget Negotiating Team.
Hello. Thank you for having me. And obviously, I'm a big supporter of the arts, big supporter of independent theater, and want to see everyone be able to survive this moment. You asked if there's something that we're excited about or looking forward to, and that's a really hard question to answer right now in life generally. But one thing that we can all be hopeful for is that independent theaters are going to survive, and that we're going to do everything we can to allow them to survive. So that's something to be hopeful for. I don't get excited about too much right now. Let me just say, I understand that the current situation represents an existential crisis for all of you, and survival is essential here, and without complete cancellation of rent and rent forgiveness for the duration of this crisis, so many small and independent theaters would simply fail and cease to exist. We cannot allow all of you to be removed from the cultural landscape of the city of New York. There is no city of New York without artists, and there is no theater community without small independent theaters. So, so I certainly support the cancellation of rent. And look, we certainly support the legislation going on in Albany. As you know, Senator Gianaris has some good legislation. Obviously, you've got two of the most progressive assembly members on this panel right now. And as the chair of cultural affairs for the city of New York, who sits on the budget negotiating team, staring at a $10 billion deficit right now, you know, I am going to be devoting the next month of my life to making sure that our community is respected in this process and not devastated. But it goes beyond simply funding and allocation of funding, because for so many of you, you simply can't be right now, right? You can't exist as you normally exist right now. And as you mentioned, you know, theaters, whenever we come back, whatever phase you're in, right? How theater reopens, right? Can you even fill the house, right? Are you limited to 25% capacity, 50% capacity? And how do you even survive with that limited capacity? So, so we have to rethink the whole paradigm within which you exist. And part of that, obviously, in this moment of crisis, involves rent forgiveness while we are going through this and your doors are closed and you are unable to generate any kind of revenue whatsoever. Well, look, I think the council is doing some great work. We passed a package of legislation meant to help commercial tenants survive, and obviously we are hoping that the state legislation will pass and get through. You know, I'm sure that your state legislators can talk a little bit more about the situation in Albany, but hopefully Senator Gianaris, who is my senator, that legislation passes, and the governor sees fit to approve it. But you know, we are laser focused on making sure that small businesses survive, and I include you all in that vein, because small independent nonprofit theaters are also small businesses. So we have more legislation coming. You know, I also think that as we introduce legislation today in about 3 minutes when the stated meeting of the City of New York starts. We're talking about opening streets to restaurants and plazas. We should be thinking about extending that to cultural performances, right? And maybe allowing independent theaters to have a production on a plaza outside, social distancing and mask appropriate. But the legislation that we're passing today is about, we're introducing today, is about restaurants and making sure that they have the sidewalk, street, and plaza space to operate safely. But that should be expanded, and I am working to make sure that's expanded to include taking the arts and theater, in particular small, local, nonprofit, independent, community-based theater, into the streets so that people can actually be sitting there and having a beer and maybe a cocktail, but then also safely enjoying a performance. I think that's part of our, re-envisioning how we do the work that we do and how you all are going to survive this moment. Because going inside for a while is going to be challenging to a lot of people. And even when you do go inside, that's going to look a lot different than it did before COVID. So getting us outside and making it easier to go outside is incredibly important. And I also just want to shout out, because I know that there's some Queens folks. I love small independent theater everywhere, but I know that Cambry and some folks from QED and Sheila Lewandowski from the Chocolate Factory and some of the others who I've seen in the chat, I just want to shout them out because they do great work and I know how important it is. And I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I know how terrifying this moment is and what an existentially threatening moment this is to your livelihoods and to artists in general. So maybe that was too long, Guy, but that was the answer to that question.
No, I think that was very helpful to understand. I think any creative solution to being able to hold events, bring people together, and bring things together, I think is going to be helpful for our community. I know that we're running up right against your time, so.
Well, I have staff on this call and I have staff monitoring the stated meeting, and they're telling me that I'm not needed yet on the stated meeting. So even when I leave, Jack Bernatovitz, who's my cultural liaison, is going to remain on the call, but I can remain on until my chief of staff texts me and tells me that I have to join the stated meeting. I think Thalia Spanish Theater is on the call as well, and we are huge supporters of Thalia, which is one of the most amazing theaters in the world, if not in Sunnyside, Queens.
Great. Well, since we have a little bit more time, one of the questions that's been asked from the audience was about, even before this crisis, I think the rise in commercial rents was a problem for the nonprofit community. And there was conversations about rent stabilization and other ways of pushing back against that. Can you comment obviously we have this short-term crisis that we want to survive now, but the longer-term pressures continue to exist as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a supporter of a couple of different bills. Obviously, there was the Small Business Job Survival Act, but then Councilmember Levin from Brooklyn introduced what I think is an even more aggressive small business rent control law that I'm a co-prime sponsor of. And we have got to do more to level the playing field and give more power to you all in particular, but to all commercial tenants who the deck is stacked against you when it comes time to the length of a lease or renegotiating a lease, the amount of money that can be jacked up once you've made a space desirable, and then the landlord decides, what was once an abandoned spot is now turned pretty trendy because you opened, we'll say the chocolate factory or QED, and then a cute cafe opened up next door, and then a nice trendy restaurant opened up across the street, and all of a sudden, bang, we've got something really good here. But then when your lease is up, they're told your rent is going up, 50%, 75%, 100%. So I'm a supporter of both of those pieces of legislation, a prime sponsor of both those pieces of legislation. Obviously, we have resistance to those pieces of legislation from the real estate community, and we've got to overcome that resistance and pass that legislation so that you all have a fighting chance to continue to stay where you are. And, like Talia, who's been in their space for over 40 years, and the Chocolate Factory and QED in Astoria and everyone else, all of you have probably similar stories. You helped make the neighborhood what it is. And in order for it to stay great and affordable, there's got to be a chance for you to survive and stay there and also make some money and pay the artists, right? We have to pay artists, and you've got to be able to do that.
Great. You mentioned that there's resistance, as I'm sure there always is, and what we have right here is a large gathering of passionate people. So I guess my last little question is, how can the folks on this call help?
I think there's a number of things that can and should be done. I think that the number of people in government who come from the arts and who care about this issue passionately is limited. I'll be honest with you. And so I think you've heard me say this, Guy. I encourage artists to run for office and to get involved politically in their communities, get on your community board, and make sure, because we're you all produce the entertainment and the art and the shows that people live for. But then when it comes time to budget and other matters, we're the first ones thrown overboard. And that's harder to do when you have artists and people who come from the cultural community who are at the table. Before I got elected, I worked for the Queens Library, but I was also president of Queens Council on the Arts. And so I came to this believing in small cultural organizations and individual artists. In fact, that's how I met Sheila Lewandowski, who's on the call. But we've got to also elect people like, Harvey Epstein and Robert Carroll and lots of other folks who are, not beholden to real estate interests. And we've got to just put pressure on every elected official and every candidate. And we've talked about this before at LIT, like, what is your platform for culture and the arts and and theater. Do you have one? Have you even thought about this, right? Everyone talks about some of the other issues, but we've got to, as a movement, be a stronger political force. And because I can guarantee you, as someone who came from libraries and the arts, that I use every ounce of my political capital on that budget negotiating team and in leadership for culture and the arts and libraries. But, you know, if I'm not in the room, and I'm not saying there aren't lots of other people who care about this issue, there are, but you know, if you're if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So we've got to just make sure that we're getting more and more people in office who care about the arts, who've actually gone to a show, who actually know what independent theater is, and who care about artists. So I think that's one of the reasons why I've always loved Lit. And one of the reasons why, you know, I've been to a lot of your events and spoken and wanted to be a part of this, because I know that there's power. And I guess that's the last thing I would say, is that even in a moment like this, there's great power in this room collectively, right? There's great power to demonstrate to elected officials that behind you are tens of thousands, if not millions of people who want and need you to survive. So I hope that was somewhat of an answer to your question as I checked to see whether or not I am needed. It sounds funny to say on the floor of the city council, although I am in my house, but I will be called to the floor of the city council soon.
Absolutely. I think that's something all of our panelists can really relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guy, yeah. Well, would you like to move on into something that all the panelists can engage in?
Sure. If we didn't want to circle back to the other testimonials, also quickly, since the last time you told us, Councilmember Van Bramer, I did join my committee of Brooklyn CV6, where I also have gotten to see Assemblymember Carroll's work as one of the representatives for that area. And I want to give a shout out to some other lit members that are on CBs in this meeting. I know David Pincus and Robin Rothstein are both community board members who are out there, and I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting. There was a lot of applause in the chat. I wish this was still a live theater where you could hear the applause. There was some positive feedback around open spaces for arts to be you know, done in the streets while we're waiting for our venues to become fully safe again. But yes, again, thank you for your support and all of your time.